Hello, booktube. I'm here for Cromwellathon. We're reading the books of Hilary Mantel, the Thomas Cromwell books of Hilary Mantel from January, February, and March. February is Bring Up the Bodies, and March will be The Mirror and the Light, which The Guardian is actually already carrying the first chapter of. Got a little interview with Hilary Mantel there, so if it takes a little while for my pre-ordered Kindle copy to download, I can at least start on that first chapter along with whatever else I'm doing for in March. We'll get to March at some point, I guess, so sooner rather than later. So yes, this week we are doing the Black Book. This is part 2, section 1, London, January to April 1536 of Thomas Cromwell, which need to know who Thomas Cromwell is, you can go back in these videos, or better yet, go to Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse and hear him chat about these books. So yes, a brief biographical note for this section because I felt, well, for this section because I seem to be mostly over the flu that I was going through from last week. But I also, my mother-in-law ended up in the hospital. She is doing fine. But that has also been a lot of, kind of visiting and keeping her spirits up. And the problem about going to the hospital is sometimes your crazy son-in-law sits there and talks to you about Thomas Cromwell rather than keeping that kind of stuff for his booktube channel. So yeah, wish her the best. Hopefully not too much more Thomas Cromwell talks from me at the hospital. I guess it's distracting, at least. It's got that for it. So yeah, all that said, there's, as always, I'm really loving Hilary Mantel. I found this a strange section because, well, it starts off with the Queen burning, and there's a question of, well, who left that candle there? And there's, the Jane, what's her name? Jane Rochford says, like, well, somebody left the candle there. Was like, why would they have a candle there? For the usual purposes of bedchambers. And it's like, Thomas Cromwell's like, yeah, if you ever need to confess, don't go to a priest, go to me and I'll reward you, because Thomas Cromwell is slowly putting together pieces that he might need later on. And indeed, this chapter develops that. So that's the first thing. We get that and kind of the idea of, what is the border between truth and lies? Cromwell looks at that thinks about that of like, well, Catherine always claimed that she was being mistreated by I think it's, after Arthur, her first husband, died, and in turn between that and Henry, she was being mistreated. But if you look at the books, like maybe any good historian or good historical novelist does, you can see that, oh, well, maybe her household was bleeding her dry. Maybe that's why they were actually supplying her the money, but her household was stealing her money away. And Cromwell thinks about, because he's just heard that, he fled from home from this abusive asshole Walter, but then he finds out that Walter paid off basically Cromwell had stabbed somebody, and his father actually ponied up the money so that he didn't have like an assault or death charge, against him. And it's like, that's sort of really shaken. It's like he comes up with this thing of like, what else have I believed in that has actually turned out, not to have no foundation whatsoever. And I think about that on the more meta level of this novel. This is Hilary Mantel, and I get the sense of Hilary Mantel going, it's like, well, what have we believed about this guy, Thomas Cromwell? What have we just accepted as fact? Taking as like, from Thomas More defenders that he was just this brutal kind of soulless thug who was just that ground down great noble Thomas More, and her saying like, well, maybe the truth is a little bit more complicated. Or, there are various truths. Maybe you can look at the facts and you can come up with different interpretations, which, and I love how she mixes a kind of a more historical thing of Catherine with Cromwell thinking about like, what if I have kind of misjudged my father here? And indeed, within this section, Cromwell seems to find lessons and stuff from his father that have basically allow him to survive in the world as it is now. So yeah, we have that section. But then then we have 5 pages of pure freaking heart attack. Quite early on in this thing, because Henry is dead. And this is not a spoiler alert, because Henry is dead for 5 pages. And it is like a pit of hell has opened up underneath everybody in the court. And Cromwell is like, oh crap, should I seize control or should I make a run for the ports? I've got to get the Princess Mary. It's interesting. He's been correcting everyone and saying, no, Lady Mary. But now in this moment of stress, he says, Princess Mary. I've got to get to Princess Mary, Catherine's daughter, the elder of the 2 daughters. Elizabeth is just an infant at this point, and it's like she could be like the key to the whole kingdom. And finds out with a sickening thing. It's like, well, the Boleyns are holding on to her, and it's like, shit. If the Boleyns, if she could just die, and Anne is going to be a thing, and Norfolk roars at Cromwell, says basically, and Cromwell interprets it at least as, I've got you, Cromwell, your head's going to be on a spike by the end of the day. And he's like, and if the papists get Mary, well, then they'll set her up as queen, and Cromwell is dead again. And so we get this just crazy section. It's like you through a lot of this, intellectually, I've known, okay, yeah, Henry is the guy. He holds everybody's fate in his hands. But it's like, you just get the sense of, if Henry dies right now without a proper heir, it is civil war. It is freaking chaos. It is like everybody's head is on the chopping block, or, it could be, any one of them could be dead. And it's just, it's crazy. And it's just, this section is so a heart attack. It is a heart attack. I felt like a heart attack. Cromwell, it's a beautiful, Mantel is so good at this. Mantel starts off with just Cromwell. He's thinking about time in like Venice, and this Venice knight, and a Venice knight who's talking about jousting, and how it's about defeating. The most important thing is you basically have to defeat your instinct, because your instinct as a human being is to live. And no, but for fame and glory, you're going to do this insane thing, which, if that is not a metaphor for lowly born Thomas Cromwell, who could have just gone off and been a rich merchant. No, he's going to do this insane thing. He's going to insert himself into this viper's den of lords and nobles who just think he is dirt. His very existence is an affront, and he's going to propel himself to be like one of the most powerful men of the kingdom. It's like that. If that is not a defeat of instinct, of the human instinct to live for fame and glory, I do not know what is. But we go from that to suddenly Rafe is in the doorway, and his first thought is, oh my God, my son Gregory. Again, the whole thing of what's your legacy in the world? It's like, oh my God, is Gregory okay because it's jousting? And it's like, no, it's Henry. Henry is dead. Henry has basically, the horse stumbled, he went under it, and it's like he's dead, or he's dead for 5 pages at least, enough for such heart attack. Now the problem I have with all this is that everything else in this section, maybe this is just where my headspace was of my own stuff happening, my thing. The rest of it feels like an anticlimax to a point. It just feels like, and it's kind of aftermath. And a little bit of interminable. We're getting kind of like it's all very kind of, maybe my focus just wasn't there, but it's like, okay, we're going to do all the kind of the things. It's like Henry going, I think I was led dishonestly into this marriage. He's starting to push things. Of maybe I want to be let out of this. You do get the thing of Henry going, well, what's my legacy? I could be the greatest king. I could do great, wonderful deeds, but the one function of me as a king is to leave an heir, is to leave a succession, or else everything else is for naught. And you can see it. If he had died here, England could have very well just fallen into civil war. The whole kingdom could have just freaking imploded. We could have ended up having, other countries coming in and pushing their choice of a thing, and just it would it wouldn't just suck for Henry being dead and his glory. It would that would be the kingdom. And you get this sense of Henry is such a powerful figure, but also Henry is such a as this kind of such a part of this part of the state. Like his body, he's not, he is just this figure. He's an incredibly powerful figure, but he's also just this, like, he's being shoved around as much as everyone else, which maybe explains why he is such a paranoid guy, because maybe he should be paranoid, because people don't really care about him as a person. It is him as this cog, this giant keystone in this whole edifice. Anne going to him and saying, like, oh, I hope you'll never joust again. And he says, like, well, why don't you just freaking geld me? It's like, and it's like they retreat, and the Boleyns, who are like rising up, and you thought, oh my God, the Boleyns are going to take over. Suddenly it's like within this, he just turns on them, and they're just like, oh crap. They're in panic mode. They're scurrying around, and I mean, they regroup. And actually they regroup enough that Henry has almost a mirror thing much later on in the book of he turns on Cromwell and it says, oh, you want me to be your servant. You want to be king, and I'm going to be the blacksmith's boy. It's like Henry, I mean, in some ways has a very kind of justifiable fear of all these people. When he depends on somebody, he starts to loathe them, because he realizes so easily he could just become somebody's creature. He could be somebody's pawn. And in some ways he is history's pawn. He is this nation's pawn. It's funny how they talk about how with Henry, they can't really remember what Henry was like before Anne. It's like Anne so defines him. And there's sort of something in that of Henry's character is so malleable. It's because he latches on to these different forces that tug him along. It's funny because I've really not liked Henry, but actually Mantel has done a really good job of sort of sucking me in and having sympathy for the human being that is cloaked in all this power and paranoia and ruthlessness. Of just like how this could be. It's like when you look at a movie star who's acting crazy, it's like you think, oh God, this is somebody whose entire life has been consumed in in this bubble of fame, and it's driven them insane. And for all their wealth and all the adulation, you realize, wow, the human being inside there is just something that's getting shoved around by its fans, by the power, by its thing. And I really get that sense actually with Henry. So kudos again to Hilary Mantel. I think I'm just going to cut it off there. I could babble on more, and this is definitely an unfocused video. But yeah, I was wondering, I'm curious I will have to look at other people's videos. I know that Scallydandling About the Books, I think that is the channel name. We're all challenged here. I think they've got a discussion video up, but how did they feel about this section? How do you guys feel about this section? Was it something that it has this explosion at the kind of the first part, and then how did the rest of it feel to you? I mean, I know there's tons of stuff there. Maybe that's just where my head was at. So curious to hear other people's thoughts. So yeah, that's all I have to say now. I'm babbling. I will put links down below, as always, to other people's videos, the Cromwellathon kind of the playlist of all the people's videos, so you can hear what they've had to say about this section, if mine's been particularly jumbled around. And yes, I will see you next week for the last to bring up the bodies, and we will launch upon the mirror and the light. More videos later.